Hi, I'm Garrett with IDC Woodcraft, and I'm glad you've come to this video because we are going to design clamps today for your CNC router. You don't need to go out and buy clamps when you can design them up and you have the machine to make them. Clamp sets can cost $100. All right, you got the lumber laying around to do this, so I'm going to teach you how to do that, and you're going to learn something else. You're going to learn about arrays. Now, what an array is when you design one thing up and then you essentially just copy the entire item multiple times exactly how you want it to copy. So array is something that most CNC router owners don't really mess with because they don't really get it. It does take a little bit of your noodle to wrap around it a little bit, but you're going to get it by the end of the day. And you're going to have 12 clamps because we're going to do this 5-inch and we're going to do this 3-inch here.
So this is what we're going to be designing today. This set of clamps, and by the time it comes off the router, it's going to look exactly like this. So just to give you a heads up of where we're going. The first thing we're going to do is design up this one clamp right here with 3 rectangles. The first rectangle is going to be the body of the clamp. The second rectangle will be the slot, and the third rectangle will be this step on the clamp, or a clearance area. And then what we're going to do is we are going to copy it over to here and then make adjustments to make it a 3-inch clamp, and then we're going to use the array function to do all these clamps here, and then we're going to run it out on the CNC router. So one thing I want to tell you right up front, this was actually a very challenging video to make, to try to get explanations out, and I got to say I probably recorded the entire thing 6 times and I still struggled with it. So wherever you are challenged at understanding what I'm saying, I truly apologize, because yeah, it just came to a point where I was spending literally 2 days on this thing. So hopefully by the end you'll have a set of clamps, and well, I'm sure you will if you just follow through with this. And yeah, so let's just kind of jump on into this. We're going to start off with a blank slate and get started. First thing we're going to do is we are going to use our material and set up our job material size. We're going to assume we bought a piece of 12-inch by 12-inch pine that is 3/4 inch thick from one of the local hardware stores. Now, one of the first things I want you to know is if you buy that type of thing and it says 3/4 inch, rarely is it going to be 3/4 inch. It's going to vary anywhere between 5/8 inch and 3/4 inch. So we want to keep that in account when we're setting our job up. And so I'm setting up the 12 by 12, which is the numbers I have here, and I have 3/4 inch listed here, and I'm in inches. But I am setting this off at the bottom of the material, or the spoil board surface. And the reason I want to do that as opposed to setting a 3/4 inch thing and set my router bit off the top is because if the material is thinner, by the time this job is done cutting, we will have cut shapes into our spoil board, so we want to avoid doing that. We are also going off the lower left corner of the material, and we're going to select OK. So the first thing we want to do is create our basic clamp. So that's going to start here in the lower left corner. And I want my first clamp to start 1 inch in the X direction and 1 inch in the Y direction, so the corner of the clamp will be here and the rest of the clamp goes up in this direction here. So what we're going to do is go into our create vectors and the draw rectangle. Click that, and the first thing you see is we have a rectangle here with the rounded buttons, or the radio buttons, around the perimeter on the corners and one in the center. We're going to select the lower left corner, and the reason is wherever point I pick now, the clamp will draw based on that lower left corner. Now I'm going to show you right now, just by the default settings or whatever's in here. If I click right here, the lower left corner of the clamp is going to be right there. Let me just change something. It's going to be right there, and if I click, there's our rectangle. Now if I change this to the center, now the rectangle is going to be built based on the center of wherever I pick. So I'm right there, and you can see the rectangle is now built off the center of whatever I picked. And again, if I pick the upper left corner, upper right corner, the rectangle will be built from the upper right corner, just like that. So now you understand what these radio buttons do. I'm going to Control Z, Control Z, Control Z to undo. I'm going to pick the lower left corner. I want it to start at 1 inch in and 1 inch up. So in the X, I put in a 1. In the Y, I put in a 1. Now my clamps are going to have rounded corners on them, so I'm going to select the rounded external right there, and I want the rounding, we'll just put a 1/2 inch radius, 0.5. The length of the clamp is going to be 5 inches long, and it's going to be 1.25 inches wide. So now when I click create, the clamp is going to be created exactly where I want it to start at, right at this point right here. I hit create, and there it is. Now if I just picked anywhere in here, the clamp will just be created wherever I pick at, just like that. I'm going to Control Z, and I'm going to, well, I'm not going to close it yet. We need to create another area because we need the clearance area and our slot. So first let's create our slot. The slot is going to be based on the center of the clamp, right from this crosshair that has just popped up. So in order to make these crosshairs pop up and do this exactly the way we want it to do it, we have to have our snaps turned on. Right up here where I'm showing you, both of these boxes should be highlighted, where they'll have a little blue color in them and they'll have boxes around them. You know the difference because if I click it right now and there's no box around that one, the snap is turned off. Click it again, there's a box around it, the snap is on. And I want to make my slot based on the center of the rectangle, so this time I'm going to select the center radio button right there, and it automatically populated this area right here. We're going to leave it like that. The corners, the ends, we can have them square, we can have them round. It doesn't really matter. We're going to be cutting inside the slot, and a round tool cannot cut a square corner. But I'm going to make it rounded to make it look natural. We're going to use a 1/4 inch diameter down cutting end mill on this entire job. So my radius is going to be 0.125. And now we set the length. It's going to be 4.5 inches long. And the width is going to be the bolt size, which will be a 0.25 inches. Now I'm going to make that a little bit bigger to give clearance for the bolts. So I'm going to type in 0.26. And instead of hitting the create button down here, what we're going to do is, because we have our snaps turned on, you're going to see your cursor is going to start grabbing different points. And we want this to grab the center point of the rectangle, both side to side and up and down. You can see now I have dashed lines. That means that it is now picking the center point. All I need to do is just hit my left mouse button once, and there's our slot. So I don't really like that length, so I'm going to change it to 4 inches, and I'm going to hit apply. And what that's going to do is change the rectangle right now. The rectangle is highlighted, that means it's still referring to that rectangle. I hit apply, and you can see now it's shortened it up to a length that I like much better. Now what we're going to be working on is the step down on the clamp, or what we call a clearance area. So that's going to be this area and the clamp right here where it steps down from here and does that little drop off. So basically that clearance cutout is going to start at this lower left corner, and it's going to come up to the very edge of that slot right up in here. And if we do our math, right now from here to the edge of that slot is 4.5 inches. We can verify that by closing the rectangle and going into our dimension, measure the distance, click that, and just select this vector right here. Let it find the center point, and you'll know it when your cursor changes to like a crosshair. We're going to click that, and now you can see it's grabbed that point. And we're going to come over here and we're going to do the same thing right over here. and we're going to find that little center point, which is right there. Click that, and it says over here 4.5 inches. That's how big this rectangle needs to be. So we're going to close that, go back into rectangle. It's going to start at the 1, 1 coordinate. So up here, we need 1 and 1. And we're going to select the radio button. And this is going to be 4.5 long and 1.25 tall. And if we just hit create, it's going to put it exactly where we want it to be, which it just did. We're going to close that. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to copy this clamp over to here, and then we're going to shorten it up. But first I want to get things put on a different layer. So the first one is going to be the slot. We're going to highlight the slot and then right click on our mouse, and a menu is going to pop up. Currently everything is put on one layer, and we want to create new layers so that we can work with our toolpaths much easier. So I've right clicked, and down at the bottom it says move to layer. And right now it only says layer 1. That means we only have one layer, so we're going to create a new layer. So we hit new layer, and we are going to call it slot. You get this little pop-up box. We called it slot, and we're going to change the color so we can tell that it's on its own layer, and we click OK. Now when I hit escape, you can see I've got an orange slot. We're going to do the same to the clearance rectangle. I'm going to click that, right click that, and go to the move to layer, and we're going to create a new layer again, and this one's going to be called clearance. We're going to change this color to a green. We'll make it a green. Looks okay, and click OK. And now we have that. Okay, now it's time to get into the array function. So the first thing I want you to understand about arrays. There are two types. There's a circular array and a rectangular array. We are going to be doing a rectangular array. And in a rectangular array, you have two elements. You have columns and rows. A column is always up and down, and a row is always side to side. So if you have multiple clamps going side to side, that's all considered one row. If you have multiple clamps stacked on top of each other, that's considered one column. However, right now we've got one component. That's still considered one row and one column. It doesn't matter if we have 1 or 1,000. It's still considered a column and a row, but I hope that made sense. So we're going to make a second column that's going to be on one row. We're basically going to copy this clamp over to here. So we're going to use the rectangular array, and that's going to be down in the offset and layout area. And you're going to use this button called array copy. The first field up here are numbers that you can play with, but don't worry about it right now. I'll explain what they do. They will pick out the maximum rectangle that everything fits into. Let me just give you an example. I'm going to create a circle up here. And I'm going to go back into the array. And now you can see I've got a circle here. It's got a specific diameter. And the numbers that are now in here are 1.8 and 1.8. That tells me that the pick box area right now for doing an array is the 1.8 measured from side to side to the maximum size, and 1.8 up and down. Now if I select everything, these numbers are going to change. And they're going to be kind of weird numbers. One is the X is 5.07 and some change. So the maximum distance is from the edge of the circle to the edge of this clamp, since the edge of the circle overlaps or goes beyond this side of the clamp. And again, with the Y, it takes it from the bottom of the clamp to the very top of the circle. And that's what this number represents. So what we're going to do is I'm going to first delete that circle. I hope that kind of made sense to you. We know that our clamp is 5 long and 1.25 tall. So when I select that, now you're going to see it says 5 and 1.25. It's the maximum size of everything that it picks up based in a rectangle. So remember I was talking about rows and columns. We're going to put another clamp over here. That means it's going to be in one row, but it's going to have two columns. So in the row and column area, we're going to say one row and two columns. The next thing is we have a gap and an offset. So what I want to do is make this clamp start 1 inch from the edge of this clamp. So I've got a 1 inch gap between the two. So when you want a gap, you're going to select the gap feature. The offset does something a little different. The offset will basically just move it, make the copy whatever distance you specified. So let's just show you what I mean. Right now we have a 1 and a 1 in the X and Y. So that means that if I have multiple rows and multiple columns, it's going to create an offset of 1 inch. But right now it's just going to create 1 in the row direction because it's building a second column. When I hit the copy button, you see that it just created another one, but they're overlapped. I am using the offset feature, and I'm telling it to offset the copy by 1 inch. So the distance from here to here is 1 inch. Now if I Control Z that, and I switch over to gap without changing anything else, and I click copy, now it made it over there. It created a gap between the two because I told it to create a gap by selecting gap. And that's exactly what I want. So now we have our second clamp built. However, we don't want this clamp to be 5 inches. We want it to be 3 inches long. So what we're going to do is we're going to go alter these. And we have a lower left corner right now. I'm going to close this. And we're going to go into rectangle, first of all. And we have this. I want to select that rectangle. I had to escape to select the rectangle. And now our clamp rectangle is highlighted, and you can see these little buttons right here. That means that while we're in rectangle mode, it is going to do whatever we want to that rectangle. It's not going to add a new one. So basically what we're going to do now is we are going to change the dimension of that. You can see over here it says it's 5 inches long and 1.5 inches wide. We're going to change that number to 3, and we're going to apply. And what it did, it just changed this rectangle based on this lower left corner. This is where it gets a little goofy, and you may have to practice with this a little bit, but watch what happens. I'm going to Control Z, and I'm going to select the middle radio button, and what it's going to do is going to shrink it down from both sides. I'm going to click Apply. Oh, I have to change my number to 3. It's going to default to whatever size it is. So now you see it did it based on the center of the rectangle. So I'm going to do Control Z, I'm going to go back to the corner, and I'm going to change that to 3, and I'm going to say Apply. I'm going to select this I have to get out of rectangle first to select a new rectangle, and then go back into it, and that means that rectangle is now the one that's being controlled, and this slot needs to be just 2 inches long. So we're going to change the number to 2, and we're going to apply while we're selecting the lower corner. And finally, we need to select the third rectangle and change that one. So that is going to be 2.5 long, and we're going to apply. And now that rectangle is built. Now I clicked down here by accident, and that's why that other rectangle popped up. If you don't exit out and select your rectangle before you go into rectangle, it's going to create a new rectangle always. So now we have both clamps that we want. So now it's time to array them into multiple rows. We will still have 2 columns. So let's go select all these guys. We're going to do the array function again, down in offset and layout, and click array copy. And now I'm thinking we can do 7 of these. So we're going to select in rows 7, and columns are still going to be 2. We only want 2 up and downs, but we want multiple rows. And we're going to go with offset again, and we want, so what that'll do is that'll stack them the way we want to. And the distance between them, let's just say I'm using a 1/4 inch diameter end mill. We can use a 0.75. So for the offset, we're going to say 0.75. We're just going to type it in both fields. And we're going to click copy. So now you see it made a whole bunch. And the reason is because I had 2 columns selected. Okay. This is where I made the mistake. Right now I have both items selected. It's considered 1 column. When I had 2 columns, it created this column and it created this column. So I need to change columns to 1. And then I click create again. Now you can see these clamps are running way off, and I'm going to have a 1/4 inch extra material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shorten that gap up. We're going to make it a 0.625. 0.625. I'm going to create, and we have a 0.625 gap between each one of them. And so we're going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of this board. So I'm going to close that, click off of that, and I'm just going to grab these 2 and delete them. And now we'll just center everything up on our board. So I grab everything, and under Transform Objects, we're going to select the Align Selected Objects button. And right up here, we're just going to align it to the center of the material. So you watch when I click it, everything is going to move just like that. So the clamps are now designed out. It's time to do our toolpaths. So I wanted to stop for a second and just ask you if you feel like this video is helping you out to understand some things like the array function and a little bit more about rectangles, then maybe you can give me a thumbs up and a comment. And by the way, if you don't want to design up your own clamps, the G code for this project is going to be available for you on Etsy, and as well as the vector file. So yeah, the link is going to be down below in the description, so you can just get it. Basically, I'll have it set up as a plug and play. You load it up on your machine and hit go, but you'll have instructions on how to do that. Okay, well, thumbs up if you feel this is helpful so far. Let's get back to this. So the first thing we want to do is cut out our clearance area. The reason we're going to cut the clearance area first is because we don't need to cut the slots from the very top of the material all the way down. We want to start them from the surface of the clearance area. So in order to do the clearance area, the first thing we want to do is turn off our layers that aren't clearance area. And we're going to select the pocket button right here. As this is going to be a pocket cut, it's going to cut out all the material inside of that rectangle without cutting the corners, because a round tool doesn't cut the corner. But in this case, what we're going to have on our clamp is a slight radius. We can compensate for that, but I'm not going to in this video. In the file that I give you will have that compensated for you if you purchase the one I create off of Etsy. We're in a pocket toolpaths, and we're just going to select everything. And we're going to use our 1/4 inch end mill, and we're going to go half the material. So it's going to be 0.375, which is the thickness divided by 2. You can also go Z divided by 2 and enter. Oops, take that back. And Z divided by 2. No, you can't do that. 0.375. Just got to put in that number. Now, because I don't care about finish, I can be aggressive. I can have a high step over. So I'm going to go into my library, not the library, but just the router bit itself. And I'm going to make sure I'm coming at a nice high feed rate. So I am at 50 inches per minute. My pass depth is 1.8 inches. So it's going to make 2 passes, and my plunge rate is 30 inches per minute. I'm good with that. That means it's going to make a nice fast pass. My step over, 70%. I'm going to go to 80%. I'm going to click OK. So you can use either climb or conventional on this with this kind of step over. We're going to ramp into it, and our ramp is going to be the diameter of the router bit. I don't want to plunge drive right into the material, especially when I'm using a down cutting bit. And we're going to change the name of this to clearance. And we'll calculate and run that. And now we've got some slots. Not slots, we just have our clearance cuts. So that's good. Now we're going to close that. We're going to split our screen. And we are going to switch layers to the slot layer. We're going to turn that on and turn the other one off. And we're going to select our slots. So we're going to select profile for this. And we want this to be inside. That means it's going to cut inside the slots. And this is going to go all the way through the material. However, we have a start point of 0.375. It's going to start at this surface right here, which is already 0.375 deep. So you change that to 0.375. And then we go the rest of the way, which is 0.375. A lot of people get confused here. These two numbers get added together to get the depth that you want. We're going to go into our toolpath. It says we're going to do it in 3 passes. Let's take a look at our feeds and speeds. So the feed is at 50. Now the plunge rate, in this case, is also at 50. And I want that to be at 50 for what I'm doing. And so we're going to corkscrew into it. And when a corkscrew is basically a constant plunge rate at an angle, which I'll explain in a moment. And I've explained it quite a bit in other videos. So we'll just set that up and I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to do a ramp in. We're going to select that and we're going to select spiral. So what that's going to do is going to go as plunge feed rate on a spiral all the way in. When I click OK or calculate, if you've run Vectric at all, you know that the cyan lines are your plunge rates. And if the plunge rate is very small, this is going to take a very long time to cut these slots, because it's going to constantly do a long plunge around like that to cut out this slot. This is a technique I prefer using over a direct plunge and then feeding around, because it leaves surfaces much cleaner. And if I generate that toolpath, you can see that I've got a nice little setup. And we are really close to being done. The next thing is to do the outside. So I close that and I am going to go to layers and I'm going to turn everything off, turn layer 1 on, which is the body of the clamp. And we're going to select everything there and we're going to do a profile again. And this time the profile is going to be on the outside. We are going to start at Z0 and this is going to go Z equals. And that's the thickness of the material. And it's going to do it in 6 passes. Let's take a look at our feeds and speeds. We really want the same settings, 50, 50. The step over doesn't matter when we're doing this. And we are on the outside of the clamp. We're going to ramp in on a spiral. It's going to do the exact same thing. It's going to spiral all the way down. But this time we want to add tabs to it, because this is where we're cutting parts out. So you click the tabs button. And we're just going to go into that and we're going to add 3 tabs and see where it places them. So we click that and it's put 3 tabs on our clamps. That's beautiful. I'm very happy with that. I don't necessarily want my tabs to be at a radius, but I'm going to leave it there. And I'm going to just close that. Now the tab size I don't like big thick tabs, so this is only 0.1 wide and maybe a 0.15 tall. I'm going to make them thinner. I'm going to make them 0.125 tall. And we're going to just add the tabs again. Oh, we already did that. The tabs are there. We set up the calculation. We're going to name this as cutout and calculate. And you see it's corkscrewing all the way down in again. And it already set up its own optimal tool path. I'll explain how this thing optimizes this things in other videos. So we're going to just preview that tool path. Now this is probably going to be the longest operation, but there's our clamps. Let's see how long this is going to take. We go up to the clock. And overall, this will take 35 minutes to cut this. So that's not bad at all. All right, let's get this out on the router. Oh, we have to save it first. So all this uses the 1/4 inch down bit. So you want to have everything selected. Go to your save button. Hit save. All tool paths are selected. And it says up here, select visible tool paths. So that's what I have selected. It's selecting everything that's checked down here. And we save the tool paths. And we're going to call it clamps. I already had one there because I had to practice this and rehearse it first. That file is saved. Now let's put it on the router. So we've got a board clamp down now. Obviously it's bigger than 12 by 12, using some clamps that I made before that I didn't like. And I just remind you, if you would just rather just run these clamps out for yourself without having to do any design work, the program is available on Etsy. The link is down below. So I'm going to set the bit 0Z on the spoil board. And I want you to take a look. You see these lines on my spoil board. Those are grid lines. If you don't have a grid line on your spoil board, you're working way too hard. I have a video that you'll want to see, and the flag is going to pop up right now to show you not only how to set it up, but why you want grids. Now we are using a 1/4 inch down bit for this entire job. We're zeroed out now, and we are starting to run. So the first operation is the step on the clamp, or the clearance area. And now we're getting into the slot, and this is where you can start to see this ramp down spiral type of cut. You notice that when you are doing cuts, your router has to plunge in, but you see this isn't plunging at all. It's just tapering down around a spiral. It's much easier on the router, and you can tell that it's doing that because it's feeding back and forth right now, and you see the collet is just slowly turning. So here we're just showing that again, and you see it's just slowly going into the cut back and forth. You run less risk of issues with this too when you're doing a straight plunge. You can have some bounce around as it's plunging, and it can kind of mess up some holes. So now we're doing our cutout, and this is the longest part of the job, maybe 15 minutes to do all 12 of these clamps. And then I just took my utility knife and cut the tabs. That's why I like to make small tabs, makes them very easy to remove. And there's the clamp. And all we have to do is a little bit of cleanup. So after I sanded them, there's just lots of ways you can use step clamps as opposed to flat clamps. There you go. Now you know how to make clamps. Be a great first project. If this video is helpful to you, give me a thumbs up and a comment, and have a great day.